Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973.
8 before 8, should we stick with the Elizabeth line then and our reporters' challenge? We'll check in with them probably just after the 8 o'clock news, where I think the young woman who's travelling on the Elizabeth line will be at her destination, and our political editors will probably be all at sea somewhere on the river, but we'll find out. And staying with the Elizabeth line, let's bring into the conversation Conservative MP and Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who joins me now. I have a note here. There's been considerable investment, £18 billion, but it will bring £42 billion to the UK economy. How is that figure attained? How do you get to that figure, Transport Secretary? Good morning.
Morning, Nick. I often ask the same questions of my officials. How's this been worked out?
Yeah.
There's a mechanism called a BCR, which is a sort of basically a cost-benefit ratio, and the purpose of it is to calculate out through some mysterious means exactly the value to the economy. I suspect in this case a lot of it will have been to do with the investment involved in both building it and the potential for it to speed up journeys. And I got to go on it a couple of times last week on Monday and Tuesday, and of course when Her Majesty came to open it on Tuesday. And it really is, if you were to dream of a transport system and how it should be, air conditioned, comfortable, smooth ride, beautiful, open public spaces and platforms, this would be it. So I can't tell you in detail how it's calculated, but I do know that the economists are experts at working these figures out.
All right, well, it's interesting you challenge the numbers as much as I do, but there's still a job to be done. There's still, we had to connect, I understand, parts of Berkshire and parts of Essex. When are you hoping the Elizabeth line will be finally concluded, Secretary of State?
Yes, I think the answer is somewhere during next year, that all the different bits and pieces are joined up, and it has quite a lot of interconnections with the wider network and the timetabling elsewhere as well. So I think it will be part the way through next year. There's a further opening, I think I'm right in saying, this October. The project's actually run by the Transport for London Commissioner, who'll know the detail on the dates.
All right. One thing that you will know about, and this is the front page of one of the newspapers today: power blackouts, petrol shortages, empty shelves loom if rail unions vote to strike, it was revealed last night. 4 in 5 services could be cancelled if RMT, Rail and Maritime Transport Union chiefs win support for the summer walkouts. A response, and how likely is it that we might meet that almost apocalyptic picture, Mr. Shapps?
Well, I really don't think there's any reason for us to have to get there, not least because you and I and every person listening, the taxpayer, has put in £16 billion to keep the rail service running during coronavirus. That's £600 for every household in the country, whether you use the railway or not. So I think this is a very inopportune moment for the unions to be balloting which one of the unions, the RMT, has. The others have not so far, because they say it's about pay, but the pay discussions hadn't even started. So this is well ahead of the jumping the moment.
Jumping the
and
gun.
I just think
the gun. Yep.
The gun. Thank you.
That's right.
But I just think that what they need to do is sort of sit down and discuss. We don't want to see. I love the railways. I know they do. We want to see the railways operating for people. I don't think the public will be very forgiving, having saved every single job on the railway through enormous taxpayer contribution. As I say, £600 for everyone listening to this. To then see wide-scale strikes would not be appreciated, and of course we want them to carry on speaking to us.
So are you confident about the vote tomorrow then, just to clarify that point?
Look, I don't know which way the vote. It's actually a whole series of votes, so it's quite possible that some will be in favour and perhaps not all of them, and it is only one of the 3/4 unions involved. So this is absolutely imminent, and of course if it came to it, of course we would prioritise the supply chain, food, freight transport and energy as well on our trains. But I think we do not need to be here. I don't think it's reasonable. I don't think it's fair on the travelling public, and we have to weigh up pay against the pay of teachers and doctors and nurses, all of whom have had a less favourable settlement than railway workers over the last decade or so.
Although this is not directly under your control, something that's also imminent, Secretary of State, is the strike at 2 tube stations for the Jubilee weekend next week, they being Green Park and Euston Station. You'll know, but for those living away from London, they are absolutely key for anybody who wants to go and enjoy celebrations at Buckingham Palace. You'll be aware that those walkouts will close those 2 stations, as we understand, Thursday of next week. A word on that?
Well, just a word to the unions. If you're trying to make yourselves unpopular, I already talked about the £16 billion the taxpayers put in to keep the railways running. If you're trying to make yourself unpopular, I would have thought doing something over Her Majesty's Diamond Jubilee, with the only people in history who will have been alive when a monarch celebrated 70 years on the throne. I can't think of anything less popular that they could conjure up, and I believe this is an unrelated dispute to do with a management.
This is allegations
issue
of
or
bullying
something.
and harassment of a certain individual, which have been going on for years, by the way. So this is something they could have looked at prior to this. Go ahead, if you would.
I mean, I just think, doing this when, frankly, people want to just have a weekend celebrating Her Majesty's extraordinary achievement of 70 years is just like asking for them to be the least favourable people in London if they go and do that.
Right.
Just have some common sense. That's what I'd say.
OK, we've got to have a conversation about those photographs that were released last night. Did Boris Johnson intentionally mislead MPs when he said all rules were followed at that event on the 13th of November 2020?
No, look, I've been on your programme before and you've heard me say this, but like many of your listeners, I couldn't see my own dad for 4 months, who was in hospital during this period. And it makes me angry to see pictures. We know that the police have thoroughly investigated. They haven't fined the Prime Minister for that event. And I think the Prime Minister came to the House and said what he said, believing that he had literally just popped by, presumably left his office, walked by there, raised a glass to a long-standing member of staff who was leaving, and left the room. And I assume that's why the police have not provided a fixed penalty.
So to whom is your anger directed, Mr. Johnson?
Well, look, I think the Downing Street operation, as the Prime Minister has said, was a letdown. The Prime Minister has apologised. He agrees.
He's responsible for it, isn't he, Mr. Shapps? He's the chief executive.
Ultimately, the actual running of Number 10 doesn't actually operate quite like that.
But you are angry at Mr. Johnson, then, for attending this event?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has already said he's disappointed in himself for what happened over that period of time. And let's remember, the Prime Minister himself had only been in hospital during that year in a very touch and go situation. He lost his mum during coronavirus. He was affected in many different ways by what happened in coronavirus. So I don't think he was going out of his way to break rules, but I think he's disappointed as am I about.
But this is
what
a
happened.
party. You accept that, don't you? You're a frank-speaking bloke. This is a party.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that there were fixed penalty notices issued from that event, but not to him.
Yeah. Why might that be?
Well, I see in the photographs actually that there are red boxes. Those are ministerial boxes.
Yes.
That's where his work would have been, and I suspect he probably left his office, walked into that office with his work. I imagine to take them back to his flat to do his work, and literally was asked by someone, "Can you go and thank X who's leaving?" Cheers, thanks very much. Thanks them, and walks out. And as I say, the police have put in huge resources, a lot of people to this, and a massive amount of money's been spent. I'm not here to second guess the Met Police, just as I'm not here to second guess the police in Durham, who are currently investigating the leader of the opposition and the deputy leader of the opposition for whether what they did constitutes breaking the law.
Do you find it difficult to defend the Prime Minister on occasions such as these?
Well, I just think that, the Prime Minister has said it himself. He feels embarrassed about what happened. But I don't think he was, well, I know, given what I just said about him being in hospital, running the country through what was an extraordinary crisis. And by the way, doing so incredibly well. We were the first country in the world to vaccinate with a actual official drug.
Imagine how we'd done if you hadn't been
out.
partying all the time. We'd have done even better.
Well, I
possibly.
mean, let's be serious about this. He managed to get the vaccination out to us all, the booster vaccination out to us all, for us to unlock as the first major economy in the world. I think he was handling huge numbers of things and was asked to walk into a room and thank some people and unwise. But he has fundamentally reformed Number 10, set up an office of the Prime Minister, new permanent secretary and so on in the process.
Coming very much to matters in your department, last minute or so I have with you. Staff at the Department for Transport were taught circus skills of juggling as part of a series of away days last winter, costing me, you and all taxpayers £18,000. Why is it necessary for your colleagues to learn how to juggle?
I don't think it is, and I can assure you, Nick, it won't be happening again. I wasn't happy to see the story in the papers, and frankly, I understand that there are obviously the juggling was done as an icebreaker or something. I understand the need to get people together, particularly when they haven't met up for a long time, and build teams, but I don't approve of that sort of thing, and I can tell you, I won't repeat my conversations. It won't happen again.
Just give me a brief idea of what you said to your colleagues. Please.
I best not, but I was not aware of it.
I'm warning my listeners in advance.
It will not be repeated.
One of your senior colleagues, I warn my listeners in advance, Ben Wallace, has told me in the past he gets very frustrated by this bollocks. Would you share the same sort of word, Mr. Shapps?
Well, I'm far more polite, but I certainly share the sentiment.
OK, and we don't need another mini-Mexican railway, which your staff also learnt, a 20-minute mini-Mexican railway construction session.
No, look. I think it is worthwhile to bring staff together, and particularly, I think we had about 1,000 joiners who have never met each other because they happened to join during coronavirus and dealing with that crisis and working from home. So I don't want to be sort of a purist about this. I think there is a point in getting people together. I do not approve of taxpayer-funded juggling, and I didn't know about it, and it certainly will not be happening again at DFT.
Lastly, last time we spoke, and you are one who's put your money where your mouth is, you were seeking to take in a Ukrainian refugee family. I think you were thinking of a mum, a child of 6.5, a grandmother in her 70s, and a dog called Max. Did it come about, Secretary of State?
It did, and they've all been living with us for the last 6 weeks, and they're settling in very well, and the dog in particular has been a big hit, except for with our 2 cats who have half left home. They only come in at night now when the dog is not running riot.
OK, but everything is blissful in the Shapps household, I trust.
Reasonably so. We're sort of a room short, actually, but our son's at university. We're OK until he returns home. We'll work out what to do then.
They'd have to sleep with Max the dog by the sound of it.
It sounds like that.
Yeah, well, credit for you for taking them in. Well done. Thank you for your time as ever. 4 minutes after 8 here. Conversation with Grat Shapps on LBC, but it's time for the news.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, London's delayed and over-budget Elizabeth line has finally opened. The Mayor Sadiq Khan has described it as a landmark day and says the new east to west